All right, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming out today. I know the weather is really bad and driving is kind of scary, but thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed the program. So today we're going to be talking about the intersections between the Israeli government and the US government and how they use similar tactics of suppression to perpetuate violence and surveillance. The first person we have speaking is Eli Newell of If Not Now. So welcome, Eli.
Thank you. All right, gonna get set with these mics here for a second. Let's see. Thank you. Absolutely. Yep, I gotcha. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Hi. Everyone can hear me okay? Yep. Okay, and hopefully for folks tuning in online, happy to be with you. Well, I'll just intro myself real quick and share a little bit about what brings me to this conversation. It's really vital and searingly relevant and immediate conversation we're having today. I am a white Ashkenazi queer Jewish person living here on Council of Three Fires land, where I've lived for about 12 years. Both sides of my immediate family immigrated to the US before the First World War through numerous relatives and direct ancestors, many of whom perished in the violence that befell Jews in Eastern Europe in the century leading up to the Shoah and the Holocaust. And my beating heart is that of an artist, really, first and foremost. I spend my days grassroots organizing, and I come to the work through art and storytelling, whether it's sharing real-life accounts with you like I'm going to do today, or as the creator of live performance, where I've spent a lot of my career as an adult and actually as a child too. That's what really brings me joy. And art as resistance, art as agitation and education is, I think, what makes the world go round. I attended pluralistic Jewish day school. I grew up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and that is really the community where my passions took roots, a vibrant arts scene, as well as a just remarkable network of social justice around the indigenous struggle, remaining steadfast on Turtle Island, and lots of beautiful multiracial organizing work and mutual aid networks that have existed long before this decade. I was educated into a pretty strong ideology of liberal Zionism. There were Israeli flags in almost every classroom that I learned in for the first 11 years of my educational life. And I knew the Israeli national anthem before I knew the US national anthem by heart. I've been a witness to and a receiver of anti-Semitic speech, harassment, and threat, both inside and outside of the Jewish community. And in high school, I attended an immersive learning study abroad program in Israel, Palestine, which described in its education of the land and geography, explained the West Bank exclusively with the term Judea and Samaria, and also described settlements to us in three categories: defensive settlements, historic settlements, and ideological settlements. I did not interact with a Palestinian person directly or hear a firsthand account of the Palestinian experience, either under occupation or in diaspora, until I was 16 years old. And the final thing I want to say, just introducing myself, is that I love being Jewish. I love Jewish thought, text, ritual, art forms, aesthetics, imagery, mysticism, community. I feel immense gratitude for having been raised in a tradition that values lifelong learning, Talmud Torah, and intense spiritual and intellectual argument, as well as justice seeking and truth. And that love has inspired me to become a rabbi chazan, a rabbi cantor in training. I'm currently studying in rabbinic and cantorial seminary, where I'll be for the next couple of years, working towards synthesis of my spiritual tradition with art making and community organizing. And I am also a full-time national field organizer with If Not Now Movement, which is an organization of American Jews mobilizing to end US support for Israel's apartheid system and bring about equality, justice, and a thriving future for all who live between the river and the sea. I'm glad we're fans of that. I'm a fan too. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the work that I've done, since a lot of the things that I just described to you from my childhood, building partnership and solidarity with Palestinians, and also I really come into activism through the climate movement and through the struggle for climate justice, for land back, and for sovereignty on native land here. And so I see those struggles as deeply interconnected. In fact, it was my work in that space that brought me to raise a lot of my own consciousness around this piece of the colonialism that perhaps I had not reconciled from my own childhood and from my own history. And I also would be remiss not to remind us that 2 days from now is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is observed around the world every January. And it's a reminder of the authoritarian regime which murdered some 6 million Jews alongside LGBTQ+ people, Roma people, disabled people, left-wing political dissidents. It wiped out about 2/3 of European Jewry and forced most other European Jews to leave. The Holocaust has left an indelible mark on Jewish communities around the world, and it has also shaped much of our international system of law, defining the international crime of genocide, for example. And for all the convoluted and paradoxical elements to the relationship between the Holocaust and the actions and propaganda of Israel's government, it may be appropriate that we are having a conversation today about the intersection between colonial tactics that take place in the United States and in the militaristic project of the State of Israel, because the story of the Holocaust and the Jewish state and the US are quite inextricably linked, both in my lifetime and in that of, for example, my parents' generation. There are 120,507 Holocaust survivors living in today's Israel-Palestine, according to data from the Holocaust Survivors' Rights Authority. And that number, of course, is significantly lower than it used to be. The parallel truths of what the State of Israel and 20th century Zionism have represented for the world's Jewry in contradiction to the actions carried out by the state, its government, and its military in collaboration with their allies, those are really uncomfortable and ugly truths that many in the Jewish community have yet to face and hold. And I offer that in their contradictions also lies a path to intervention and repair. In the global community, there is an ongoing narrative battle for our vision of what the legacy of these kinds of horrors will be, and also what vision of safety we hold as a people. On the one hand, we have the right-wing politicians in the world, like the current authoritarian regime that we're living through here in the US, like Netanyahu, like the legacy institutions that prop them up and fight for their agendas, like AIPAC and ADL. These are folks who say that the lesson of the Holocaust is that Jews can only stay safe through military strength and might, that Jews perished in the Holocaust because perhaps they were too weak to stand up to the Nazis, being the implication. This is an insult, and using the legacy of the Holocaust and of systemic anti-Semitism throughout the past millennium to crack down on advocates for human rights and to bolster militarism and isolation flies in the face of all that we hold in our legacy as a people of immigrants and a people of diaspora. I want to just end with a little quote that I think is apt right now from Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, which some of us may have read. She writes, "The flip side of the post-World War II cries of never again was an unspoken never before. The insistence of lifting the Holocaust out of history, the failure to recognize these patterns, and the refusal to see where the Nazis fit inside the arc of colonial genocides have come at a high cost. The countries that defeated Hitler did not have to confront the uncomfortable truth that Hitler had taken pointers and inspiration on race-making and on human containment from them, leaving their innocence not only undisturbed, but also significantly strengthened by what was indeed a righteous victory." She goes on to ask, what if full-blown fascism is not the monster at the door, but the monster inside the house, the monster inside us, even we whose ancestors have been victims of genocide. So those who advance this safety through violence model of Jewish safety have trafficked in the same extraction of this legacy from its context and distorted the memory itself. And I would say this is true, of course, with regard to the legacy of colonialism in the United States and of the entities and the groups that come to enact this agenda for all oppressed groups and marginalized groups, as we are many hundreds of years into this project, further than the project of Zionism and the State of Israel. So I want to just couch this conversation with that, and to tell you a little bit about my work on the ground in the West Bank. I'll try to keep it brief so I can also answer some questions, but I will share a few just anecdotes. My relationship in the West Bank includes some folks in the South Hebron Hills, which people may be familiar with that community from the amazing Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land. But I've actually spent more time on the ground and in direct relationship to folks in the area called Burin. Burin is a village just sort of central, little bit north in the West Bank. We're talking about a pretty small area in general. So, communities are very close together and sandwiched between often Jewish settlements and other Arab, Palestinian, Bedouin communities. The settlements tend to be on top of hills, sort of fortified, and the other communities that have been there for many generations tend to be more in the valley. Without going into like the geopolitical context for Oslo and for the different areas of the West Bank, I can just say that the divide and conquer tactic has been really the through line from the very beginning of colonization all the way up through many changes to the status quo throughout the 20th century and 21st. There exists a status quo in which freedom of movement is not possible, in which freedom of development, freedom of maintenance of crops and water sources, the conversation about food supply and food sovereignty is probably the most striking thing from my experience working in the harvest. The olive harvest is a period of about 2 months every fall, where many communities in Palestine are essentially executing their harvest, which exists as their financial sovereignty for the entire year, not just for that season or those 2 months. So the ability to access their land, which many folks that I know have the deeds to houses and the deeds to land that go back many generations, and can point to these documents. Of course, they're not subject to the same system of law and the same civil dealings as the folks who are settling the land in some cases for the first time, who are Jews and Israeli Jews and Jews from around the country and around the world that have come to build settlements in this project of expansion and ultimately moving towards what we all see as eventual annexation and some pretty harsh realities. The conditions have really just worsened over the past many decades, but in particular since October of 2023, under the quote-unquote wartime law, there's been a complete breaking down of the line between different government entities and military entities, something that may be resonant as we think about right now the chaos happening on the ground here in the US, where we see different government agencies and law enforcement agencies that are working not exactly in partnership, but alongside one another, and often protecting the status quo being the thing uniting them. And of course, you see the powerful then hiding behind this narrative of, well, they're not the same group and they're doing different things. And I think when I see folks talking about, the National Guard and local police and state police and ICE and Border Patrol being, entirely different agencies themselves, we all kind of can see the truth for what it is, which is at the end of the day, there is a status quo that's being protected by all of these agencies, whether they're doing it in deep coordination or not. This is true of the reality in the West Bank, in Palestine, in Gaza, which of course Gaza and the West Bank are not next to one another and are also divided from one another and cut off through a series of geopolitical loopholes and violations of international law that have been designed to essentially dissuade the ability of folks to organize and connect and create conditions for their own struggle for justice. In the West Bank, you see settlers, you see soldiers, and you also see settler soldiers who are essentially reservists that may have served in the Israeli military at one point. Maybe they're not actively serving. Maybe they put their military uniform on that day, but haven't been in service for a while. Maybe they didn't. There's just all sorts of chaos around who are we actually coordinating with right now and who is coming here to do things from kicking bags of olives that have taken the entire day to harvest down the hill so that they can't be taken to pressing into oil, or even burning groves of olive trees, native olive trees. In my experience, the people who are burning native plants and native vegetation are usually not in the right. There's a long history of that also in the colonization of this land and the planting of non-native trees, which connects to a long-time exchange in the organized and institutional Jewish community in the US and also the Christian Zionist community. There's been a program of planting trees in Israel with the idea of sort of continuing this exchange of charity and developing the land and what they used to call making the desert bloom. Unfortunately, the trees that they're planting are non-native, often European species that cause a lot of ecological problems and have contributed in their own way to ecological devastation and real upheaval in the land and the ability of the land to engage in its own regeneration and growth. And so some of the farmers that I worked with in Burin spoke of their stories having been imprisoned for indefinite periods of time in military detention for simple things like defending young children from being assaulted with rocks and pelted, and from things like bringing crops to harvest from one part of the land to another part of the land so that they could reach their family and supply their friends and cousins with food. At one point, the group that I was with had a girl who was probably no older than 6 or 7 run up with a fistful of bullets, bullet casings from the ground, and just show it to the group. And on those casings, you could see the marking of a logo that is a subsidiary of Elbit Systems. So a really direct correlation of weapons manufacturers and war profiteers in the military-industrial complex in the West, and the role that that plays, those very bullets, in fact, that have gunned down and taken family members from folks on the ground. And oftentimes, the claim is self-defense of some sort of a prevalent threat of violence. And I think it was hard to get that out of my head yesterday, hard to get that memory out of my head, hard to not think about my dear friends who have lost friends, family, loved ones, siblings, parents, all by military and government agencies enacting violence and retributive violence, and then coming around and saying that it was because they posed some sort of a clear threat and danger. I think that the parallels don't really even need to be said any more clearly. Like we all can see them. These were not tactics that were invented by the state of Israel, of course. They have been tested and learned and embodied around many different facets of empire for a very, very long time. And they may look a little bit different in one part of the world, but the broad strokes of them are very much the same. I think something that I really want to highlight is from the moment you step down on the ground in the West Bank, you are really struck by the coordinated and intensive network of community care that is a necessity to engage in the most simple acts of day-to-day life and survival. The aspect of coordination and mutual aid across different families, community members, activists, and allies in the land is the thing that sustains and allows for folks to make it to and from school, work, meals, bed, home. It's very much a rinse and repeat framework of, they always say in the West Bank, the catchphrase is hurry up and wait, essentially is a tension of always moving very quickly and also moving very slowly with a lot of nimbleness to the circumstances, which can change really, really quickly on a dime. Sometimes roads that are open are closed. Sometimes there are blockades of entrances to villages and networks of hills that would take 3 times as much time to get to your destination as it normally would. You don't know what your day-to-day is going to look like on a good day. And on a bad day, which is a lot of the days, you're seeing folks that are doing absolutely dedicated nonviolent resistance. They are doing sometimes the bare minimum of just showing up on their land that has for generations been in their family's story. They know the trees, they know the animals, they know the directionality, they know the networks of trails that maybe aren't even visible right away to the human eye, but just tell you how to get to the right grove of olive trees to harvest at the right time. And the fact that folks who are practicing that kind of nonviolence with such discipline are met with such extreme violence, that is a really, really hard thing to comprehend if that's not been your experience and your privilege growing up in a space that you don't have to worry about what you're going to be met with when you're walking home from school or from work, or when you're going about your day doing what it is to provide and to do your job. There is also a policy of retributive and collective punishment when folks are able to successfully execute a harvest or to access a piece of land that maybe wasn't previously available, which is something that we were really happy to make possible when our group was on the ground doing the olive harvest. As soon as we left, our host was detained indefinitely for a couple of days, released, was abducted in front of his children and family. Houses relating to that family were vandalized and destroyed. There were beatings, and there were just horrifically abusive flyers also distributed, essentially saying, it's a bummer that your international friends aren't here to help you. And so the cruelty is the point, as we've heard many, many times. The cruelty really is the point. And every day, and around when the school day ends, you see the cloud of tear gas wafting up from the middle of town, where there's been disbursement and targeting of teenagers who are just, playing, hanging out, doing whatever it is they're doing, and met with this sort of tactical chemical weaponry, much of which some of us have been met with while protesting and supporting and protecting our neighbors here in the past 6 months. So those are things that you're seeing across the world, and just stark parallels to the violence of unlawful and tyrannical ICE activity here in the US today. I wonder if maybe I pause, because I think I saw a couple of questions starting to come up, and I'm happy to answer if there are any immediate questions about this time that was spent, or if facilitators have another idea and you want to jump in, you're totally welcome to. But I'm just curious if anyone is wondering anything about my experience in Boreen and about the relationship to the land and to the folks who call it home. I saw a question here, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if you can say more, and maybe by way of example, about the community support and mutual aid networks being apparent the minute you set foot in the West Bank.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like in real time?
Yeah, well, I will say some more about the mutual aid networks and the community support and how apparent that was from the moment that you touched down in the West Bank. Yeah, I think the first thing is just the constant stream of encrypted messaging and calling that is just literally happening at all times. In order to coordinate and to be in relationship to other folks and to be in essentially defensive steadfastness on this land, being able to just show up, people need to be constantly giving information because who knows what's going to happen at any given hour. Things can shift really drastically. So road closures, blockades, checkpoints, those are things that sometimes are fixed and sometimes they are what they call flying checkpoints, where folks from the military will just sort of set them up and decide this is a checkpoint today. And another thing that they do is they declare closed military zones, which is a kind of a legal catch-all wherein they have a lot more leeway to act with impunity if something is a closed military zone and they're the ones determining what it is. Yeah, those kinds of things. So the information sharing, and then also the sense of shared struggle and communication between villages and between families in villages, because oftentimes people's groves of trees and crops and their greenhouses, they have also been affected by the encroachment of occupation and by the divide and conquer strategy. So roads that were open or passageways that were open 5 years ago, 10 years ago, are not anymore, in some cases just at all. Things that had been declared in one area of occupation, there's areas A, B, and C that have their own delineation of who's allowed to be there and who's allowed to build there, and this is part of how the apartheid system is maintained. Those require a lot of coordination because they are literally physically cut off from one another. So if people need to transport human farmers and supplies and get from one place to another, sometimes you need another truck waiting for you around a big rock formation that's been put in place by the military to disallow freedom of movement. And so things like that, coordinating transportation, supplies, people's olive harvesting tools are confiscated frequently, and they're very expensive. When harvests get decimated, there's just a lot of community care, and it is, of course, by necessity, but it reminds me a lot of the systems and networks that we're hearing about in my hometown, in Minneapolis, St. Paul right now, and the systems that we participate in here in Chicago over the past many years. Yeah.
Did you by any chance happen to talk to any disabled people when you were in the West Bank or anything like that? Because we hardly hear about the disabled experience of the one who's being occupied in the West Bank. And then furthermore, when we talk about ICE in, what are we also doing not only to protect our non-disabled neighbors who are being brutalized, but the disabled neighbors, it's on a whole other level for those disabled people who are being targeted by ICE. Yeah. And also the IOF is the first to target disabled people because just recently a disabled man was violently beaten in the West Bank.
Yeah. Thank you. The question is experiences and stories of disabled folks in the West Bank, in communities that are targeted, and how that experience maps onto the larger experience of occupation and human containment. And I mean, the answer, much of it was in the question. I think it is a horrific element of caste that exists in our community as much as it does, and is sort of at an absolute extreme under military law and under the apartheid system. As you said, the targeting, it happens in such a way that the very notion of steadfastness and resiliency is a weapon against folks who are not able to access parts of the network of care and parts of the land and parts of the societal structures that allow for people to survive. So every element of marginalization that we are aware of and attuned to in our communities, it's dialed up a very extreme notch under the apartheid system. I mean, I'm thinking particularly of, like, there are stories of friends and folks in the South Hebron Hills who are navigating just tremendously difficult, violent system of home demolitions, constant home demolitions. And so if home demolition is the tactic, if we're talking about actually physically taking away the structure that allows for people to be safe and to support life and family, the way that that affects folks that are more homebound is going to be just so much more and so much worse than the way it affects folks who are able to participate more in the shepherding economy and actually be around the hills. And we're seeing that in that area in particular because that's what the civil ministry has been engaged in, really, is about taking away the structures where people live. And it's not quite the same tactic as the settler terrorism. There also is a lot of really heavy bodily violence that is done to folks by the settler movements and the settler yeshivot, the kind of houses of study, very patriarchal communities that really coordinate with the military, and sometimes vice versa. So there are people who are dubbed themselves as the de facto vigilante police who don't really have any kind of government role or military role. There's a person, like infamous person in the Bureen area that drives around in a golf cart and essentially is the like community security for the settlements. He's part of one settlement, but he acts as security for 3 of them. And you know, he terrorizes the group. He terrorizes the folks in these communities, and was actually sanctioned by the Biden administration, which is mostly a symbolic gesture, but it does direct more visibility on the issue itself. And of course, that sanction was lifted pretty immediately under this current regime. And the guy's name is, well, he goes by Yaqub, which is another really classic colonial tactic of taking a native name, took an Arabic name essentially in his relationship of terror to the community that speaks Arabic. And of course, there's a story from a friend of mine in the land who said, you know, when he first got there, which was probably 10, 15 years ago or something like that, someone in the Jewish community that was there supporting as an activist was like, Yaqub, what are you talking about? I know this guy. His name is Yitzhak Levy. He's from Brooklyn. And that is the truth. I mean, like, you know, we're talking about people who have showed up kind of in the last couple of decades in some cases, and have also family members that have legacies of being more embedded in that settlement movement and in that violence. So you asked a question and I ended up kind of drifting away from it. But I did want to share that I think it comes in those 2 different varieties of, like, there is really status quo violence that is meant to force unlivable conditions and force that policy of ethnic cleansing by making the day-to-day one of death and devastation and permanent incapacitation. And then there's also more direct assault and violence that happens often from the military, but especially from settlers that are doing it in partnership with the military. Seems like we're definitely ready to speed it along for sure. But want to just appreciate everyone for listening to this. I will be around and maybe we'll have come back to some more questions in some way. If you check the table in the front, I have a QR code to my Venmo, doing some fundraising, and if not now, for our friends at the Bureen Land and Farming Cooperative, who I spent this time with in the West Bank, and they're working to build a children's library right now, which is really, really important for their community and their families. So if not now is splitting some of our crowdfunding between that initiative and also on the ground mutual aid and direct support in Minneapolis, which we'll be delivering in the next couple of days. So if you want to help support that crowdfunding, you can go ahead and do it at that Venmo. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have Reverend Michael Woolf, who has been arrested by ICE before, and he's been involved in the protests outside the Broadview facility in Illinois.
Here? Okay, great. And this too. Okay. not as easy as it looks. Okay. Okay, great. I just want to start out by thanking folks for being here. I think this is a really important topic. I have another set of things that I also care about around Islamophobia, and my wife and I just wrote a book, and we're having a book launch on February 4th so that I want to invite you to. And the book is actually back there, which is wicked cool because it just came out like days ago. So take a look back there, and if that interests you or you want to talk more about Islamophobia, let me know. I want to talk a little bit about Broadview and a little bit about ICE tactics and everything as I've experienced them. I think for me, the most important thing to know about Broadview is the facts that we've established on the ground about what happened there. A judge compared it to Auschwitz, and that was not a mistake. So the conditions there are absolutely filthy. There were people who were 8-person in a cell that's meant to detain 1 person, so we have over 8 times capacity. There were no working showers. When you went there, you were only supposed to be there for 24, 48 hours, but they play funny with that because they can. They have utter and complete control over people once they go into their custody. And so you have folks who had medical issues. They're not allowed to receive medication. They're not allowed to have access to lawyers or access to spiritual care. All these are established in federal law. And when you add it all up, I think it's really important that we're very clear what you have is torture. So what happened there was torture. And I think that everybody needs to understand that, and that's not up for debate. It really was torture what went on that facility, and and it was intentional. It was not just to do horrific things to people, although I think we are dealing with the devil and we're dealing with sadists, and I believe they really enjoy it. And that's been my experience with ICE officers. But they were doing it so that people would self-deport, and people self-deported from Broadview in comparison to other detention facilities or torture facilities or black sites or concentration camps, whatever language you want to use, that dot the United States. They deported at about 50% more. So people are begging to get out of Broadview for sure, and the only way they could do that is to sign away their constitutional rights. So that's the tactic that we're seeing. We're seeing dehumanization on that sort of scale. Folks who have been following what's going on in Minnesota and everything will note that some of these strategies are escalating from ICE, and much of what they're doing is getting scarier. So I would say that my data from my firsthand experience is old, but we've all seen many things. I hope if we've been understanding and going through news and trying to understand what's going on the ground there, there's a heightened sense that ICE officers can act with absolute impunity. And so we all know about the 2 folks who've been killed in Minnesota, but one of the things that we know in Chicago that didn't sort of make national news, and there weren't all these sort of emergency protests when Silverio was killed here too. And so I want to keep it centered not just sort of on what happens to protesters. I think it's wicked important. I'm not saying anything like that. But I want to keep it centered in the discussion, if we can, on the tactics also that are used on the people who are in the front line of getting brutalized by ICE, so the people most affected, right? And so I think that that's really important to note, and that's really, they will use lethal force. We understand that. And they will use lethal force in a way that they seem almost certain that they can never be held to account. And that's a really interesting thing, because we, of course, understand that while the powers that be are in office for a set length of time, we're at least planning on having free elections that could change that, and some people could be held to account. But I'm taking note of the way that people are acting with impunity, and they don't seem to think that they could ever be held to account. And that's pretty scary stuff at that point. Some of the surveillance that happens, so if you ever go to any of these protests, then you're going to find that somebody is probably videotaping you or taking your picture. Sometimes they walk around with some eyeglass type things. Sometimes they have weird big cameras on their head. There are, I'm sure, very fancy terms for all this surveillance technology. I don't know it. I just know that constantly whenever you show up in these places, or whenever you directly challenge ICE authority, you are being put in some database, and your name and image and likeness is, unfortunately, you're not a college football player, so you're not going to make money on that. They're putting you right into a database for dissidents and to know the people who are opposing the regime. And so that surveillance also happened here in Evanston. Pretty sure, anecdotally anyway, that drones were used, and that folks were able to figure out from some of our local landscape and gardening sort of services what trucks were actually being used, and were able to track them in order to detain folks. So there's these networks that they have access to that far outclass anything that you might think. And so okay, I'll talk about that later. The casual violence that ICE officers operate with against folks who are undocumented, or against folks who speak Spanish, or against protesters, is a whole swath of people, right? The casual violence that's done, whether that is striking you with truncheon, that's like sort of the basic kind of thing that can be done. Punches get thrown, of course. There's physical violence that's part of this. When I was there protesting one time, they grabbed my neck and choked me a little bit, which was very, I don't think they teach that in any sort of manual, but again, there's impunity with which people are acting. As we've all gone through, and we know so many times that chokeholds are banned, of course, because they're extremely dangerous amongst all different types of law enforcement agencies. But of course, ICE has been using a lot of chokeholds. There's been a lot of knees and backs. There's been a lot of ways that they have been working with that. And of course, the use of chemical munitions has been a hallmark, just as we heard, that links these struggles together, whether that's tear gas canisters or shooting with pepper bullets and everything. That is something that we all experience in Chicago very frequently. And I think Minnesota is, again, I feel like it's even worse in Minnesota right now. I don't even know how to say that. It's very heartbreaking and very difficult. But I think it's really important to know that I think it's worse there. So all this together, I think what we need to understand is the level of dehumanization that's going on. And so I think that what we have encountered is that both immigrants or people who could be swept up in enforcement, and allies who want to protect civil liberties in some way are enemies, right? So we're dealing with a Gestapo force, we're dealing with a secret police in some way, and anybody who wants to stand up against them, or anybody who exists as an enemy of the state now internally, anything can be used against them. Any force could be used against them because they're enemies. And so this sort of thinking, I think takes it up just a little bit from the typical kind of like cop brain stuff that happens with general law enforcement officers thinking about people as enemies. This seems to be an even more intensification of that. But I think it's really important to note that basically we have a law enforcement agency in the United States who sees a lot of people in the United States as its enemies, and feels as if it can enact almost any sort of plan to deal with them, including violence and death. So I'm not sure that we've been necessarily there in a while, but we are certainly there now. And I think it really is important to name the evil that we are reckoning with. I'm a pastor, so I'm very comfortable with thinking about evil. I think this is wretched, evil stuff. I think it has to be combated. So the intimidation, I was looking just a little bit recently that somebody was being told by an ICE officer, and I overheard similar things. Congratulations, you're on a list, right? So they'll be taking or recording your image, and they're going to say you're going to go on a list. And so the list, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, right? The list is about being labeled domestic terrorists. And so the list that's being compiled, of course, is to punish people and to enact these very vague ways to take away your civil liberties as if you're doing anything wrong, which is wild, but really important. So it intimidates people. Of course, when you kill people who are also standing up for their neighbors and their friends after they've been kidnapped with absolutely no real legal standing. When you kill some of those people, obviously you're pursuing a course of intimidation as well. So I think the intimidation goes with the dehumanization and the surveillance. And now I want to talk just a little bit about how local and state police really function to aid and abet this, because I think this is so important. Anybody who's been down to Broadview knows that the Illinois State Police are basically in cahoots with ICE and make sure that they can torture those people in those facilities without being disturbed too much. That's their main goal. And this is blessed by our governor, who evidently says that those Illinois State Police officers are there to protect us in some way. They shot me with a pepper bullet, so I don't feel super protected, but hey, that's what they're there evidently to protect. Wrap your mind around that. So the thing is that you see this also in Evanston, where it just feels like, whether it's true, I'm not a police officer, I don't know, but a casual look at things seems like Illinois State Police, Evanston Police Department, local police departments, Cook County for sure. The Cook County Sheriff is all in on ICE. They love those guys. It certainly seems like our local police make it safe for ICE to operate in our communities. And they don't keep us safe in any way. The only people who keep us safe is us. But they certainly make it easy for ICE to carry out their evil in those communities, whether by keeping people from de-arresting other folks, which is a really important role that our rapid response teams have played, or clearing them out of the way so that they can get easily from point A to point B. And I really hold accountable both the governor, the mayor, everybody basically on down that chain of command, who allows and permits and indeed instructs the police forces to collaborate. When we're talking about the surveillance that ICE does, the other thing is the Illinois State Police also does the same level of surveillance. They've got the same level of toys that they are deploying on protesters specifically to track them and to make lists. So I think that it's really important that we understand and we know that we are not just dealing with one entity, but we're dealing with, especially at Broadview, a unified command. They're all working together. And so when I've talked to the governor's office about this, when I've had meetings with the deputy governor, when all these sorts of things, they absolutely know, and they will admit that that is a really bad setup. And that the Illinois State Police were never trained for any sort of crowd control, and that they're not very good at it. And that was a direct quote there from the deputy governor's office. They're not very good at it. Why are they still there? I can only, at this point, I tried to ascribe stupidity to it, but now I can only ascribe malice. So I think that there is some way that the governor is functioning to say one thing and to act big on national TV so that he can run for the presidency. But when it comes to actual people in this state standing up for their rights and for the rights of their neighbors, he does not give a damn about that, and he's willing to trample all over it. So I think that is that's my experience. Whether that's just seeing the ISP guys high five, the ICE agents, so that you know that they're real good friends, or if it's seeing Cook County sheriffs slam people to the ground. I think it was. I think it was a Broadview Police Department officer who told me that when my hands were restricted behind my back with the zip ties, and I told them my hands were going numb, I think that was the guy who told me to shut the fuck up and that no one wanted to talk to me. So I think that they all work together, right? It's really, excuse my French, I'm sorry, there's kids here. But that's a quote, I didn't. It's kind of weird, I don't want to edit him, I want you to understand. And sorry for the live stream, who knows? I'm a pastor, but I'm just quoting. So the thing is that it's not just one entity, right? It's the enmeshment and partnership of law enforcement agencies together they're working together. And that's why this fight is not separate from abolitionist fights. That's why this fight is not separate from any fight to destroy the carceral state that we live in. These are all linked together. There is nothing that separates them. And I think that's why this event is so important, that we understand the links together between shared struggles for liberation, because we can never be liberated alone, even if we wanted to, we always have to do that together. And so I think that's probably what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Thank you so much, Reverend Woolf. That was amazing. My name is Judith, and I'm here from Evanston for a Free Palestine, and I do not have the experiences of Eli or Reverend Woolf, but I'm kind of here to talk about the ties between the Israeli military and the US government. I know a lot of you are here because you are already aware of those things, so thank you for being well informed, but I'm just going to tie some things together for us. So I think we all know that the United States was built on genocide and slavery, and we never stopped doing that. We never stopped doing that, and Israel is just an extension of that. Israel is just an extension of our colonial project in West Asia, which we call the Middle East. So after 9/11, there was a big counterterrorism training trip that a lot of U officials went on. And that was hosted in Israel. And while we were in partnership with Israel before that, there's a lot of things that went down during that time that strengthened our bond with Israel as an imperial force in West Asia, and what we were doing here to Muslims and people who were labeled as terrorists. ICE was founded in March of 2003 under the Bush administration. So ICE isn't that old, but this was the same month that the US invaded Iraq. So has anybody, just by show of hands, heard of the term imperial boomerang? Okay, some of us. So for anyone who hasn't heard this term, basically it's the idea that, like, as a country, if we continue imperialism, as we always have in colonization, we are also going to be occupying ourselves. We are going to have an occupied state in this nation. And that has always existed. That has always existed for Native people, for a lot of Black people. That is what has been happening in their communities, and I think we're seeing a lot more of that, especially as white people in suburbia. It might be new to us, but it is not new to this country. And so we are seeing the imperial boomerang playing out in real time. Many ICE agents, FBI, CIA, and police officers have taken training trips to Israel. We have an exchange program with them. So this has been going on for decades. Lots of people have made the trip, or officials have gone over there, learned their tactics, brought them back here, and trained large groups of law enforcement officials in these tactics that are being used on Palestinians and are now being used here. And I also just wanted to highlight that ICE has a field office in Tel Aviv. I'm not sure why that should be the case. I mean, I personally don't believe that ICE should even exist, but why should we have our federal law enforcement have a field office in the capital of another country? That seems strange. Yes, somebody said they're recruiting, yes. Somebody actually uncovered that, like, tweets coming from the Department of Homeland Security were traced back to IP addresses in Tel Aviv. So they are intimately involved in our operations. There is no separation, and that's what we really want people to understand. So there have been people who have been aware of this for a long time. In my research, I came across this report, which is a lengthy report that I encourage you all to look at, but I'll just summarize. It was published in 2018 by Jewish Voice for Peace and Raya, which is researching the American-Israeli alliance. And this report talked about the ties between the Israeli occupation forces and US law enforcement. And it basically uncovered some of their training tactics. And well, one of the things they were doing is they were giving live demonstrations, like they were bringing US law enforcement to Israel, to Gaza, to the West Bank, showing them what they do to the Palestinian people live, showing them videos, showing them literally, like, having them there, watching them perpetuate violence on the Palestinian population. And that is one of the things that they've been doing they've been doing, and this has been going on a long time. So I encourage anyone who wants to deep dive into this topic to look at this report that lots of people put together. It's called Deadly Exchange. Many people did talk about surveillance. There's a few things that I want to add. So ICE entered into a contract with an Israeli company called Paragon Solutions. And this happened last year, or it became public last year. And one of the things they sell is something called graphite. And what graphite does is it can scan people's faces and identify people with facial recognition. If you've been to the airport, your face, is probably in a database. I always ask them to not take my picture, but I don't know if that matters at this point. But yeah, a lot of our faces might be in there. It's also very concerning that this tech is able to hack into cellular devices. Any cellular device, smartphone, burner phone, computer, just by sending a message. You don't have to click on anything. You don't have to, it's not like a spam text you get caught up in by like clicking on a link. All they have to do is get people's phone numbers and send them a text, and they automatically gain access to their entire phone. And of course, this isn't being regulated. A lot of it also, unsurprisingly, involves AI. And they are using AI right now to search people's social medias. So they're creating databases based on even things that people are posting on social media. So all of this is increasing the surveillance state, and it's making it harder for people to speak out. As was mentioned, so when ICE was in Evanston doing raids on December 17th, they were at the gas station on Green Bay, and they were also at Home Depot, and there were a lot of people out protesting and filming them and trying to get them out of there. And it came out that they were using, well, they always use body cams, but it came out that a lot of the agents were using GoPros and also the new smart glasses. It can be hard to identify smart glasses. If you see like a little light on glasses, that's probably smart glasses. A lot of people own them themselves, but a lot of ICE agents wear them, and they record everything. So that was being used. I'm sure it's being widely used in Minneapolis right now, and also digital cameras were present there too. So they have a lot of different methods of getting people's faces to put in the database, as Reverend Woolf mentioned. The last thing I wanted to talk about was an executive order from last year that a lot of people didn't hear about. I just recently heard about it, and it's called Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. And basically, it designates anyone who falls into the category of any of these things, individual or organization, as a domestic terrorist. So if you have anything on your social media or anything that you believe that could be classified as anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the US government, extremism on migration, race, gender, opposition to traditional American values of religion, family, and morality, or anything anti-law enforcement, that under this government qualifies you as a domestic terrorist. So congratulations to a lot of people. You are considered a domestic terrorist, which is basically a compliment at this point. So one thing I want to highlight also is something that is considered a foundational American principle by this administration is support for law enforcement and border control, which would include ICE. So also being anti-ICE obviously qualifies you as a domestic terrorist under this definition. And basically what that means is anyone who is a domestic terrorist and promotes these ideas or holds these ideas or protests, they are open to being surveilled, which I think a lot of us knew, but this is the executive order. And now I am going to invite someone up here who is really, really informed about local surveillance efforts and how those are showing up.
Hello? Is this thing on? Okay. Okay, sorry. I'm on two mics here. All right, so Flock ALPR. Has anybody heard of Flock cameras? Oh, has anybody recognized these cameras on the streets here? This picture right here should be. All right, so I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to sit down like a weirdo, and I need to see the slides myself. So I want to talk through this. I'll try to keep this brief, but I'll explain what's going on here locally. So my name is David. I'm a researcher with Parsons Labs. I'm part of a coalition that studies surveillance in the Chicagoland area, and I'm actually really thrilled to be here. This is research we've been working on for quite a while, and I'm happy to bring this to the community, especially in this context with some really awesome speakers. So I'm glad to be here. I've been focused on ALPRs for the past several years, so I'll start with this relevant example because this was in the news. I'm sure it seems like a lot of people are not familiar with this, but this was a huge deal. It's a national story that kind of like went under the radar. And so this is something we've been really looking at. So let me explain really quick what an ALPR is. And then I'll touch on some other forms of surveillance being used by the cops and ICE and CBP and HSI and all those acronyms. They're all violence providers of the empire. And for all intents and purposes, in this conversation, I'm going to flatten the local and federal police, like it was mentioned before, into one category because the distinctions here are immaterial. ALPRs are surveillance cameras that take pictures of motion on the streets, generally vehicles. And these were invented in the 1970s by the British Empire as a counterinsurgency weapon against the Irish. So these are not new. There's a history, a legacy of this technology being used against people. And now we have these surveillance weapons on our streets. So there's a line from how this technology was created as a weapon of military and counterinsurgency, and now it's being used in general, on a general population here in Evanston and throughout the country. ALPR stands for Automatic License Plate Reader, which suggests that they read license plates, and they do that, but it's only a tiny part. Now these cameras are much more powerful. They extract data from the images they take utilizing machine learning and AI. They can fingerprint cars, noting color, make, model, roof racks, bumper stickers, damage. So they can profile a car and grab that data and log it into a database. The vendor for this particular model, and there's many vendors that do this, private companies. This one is called Flock Group Incorporated. And these were cameras that Evanston cops installed in secret in, I think, 2022. Didn't come to any council meeting because the contract was for $50,000. But to meet the threshold to get it on a meeting agenda, it had to be $25,000 or under. And so they split the contract up into two contracts, and they were able to sign off on this contract without approval from city council so that the public might not be aware. So when I talk to people in Evanston, I live in Evanston, nobody knew this was happening, nobody knew what these cameras are, and these cameras are practically invisible on the street. It's really hard to spot, but once you see this picture, if you take a good look at that picture, you'll start noticing them in other communities because Evanston does not have these anymore, but all of our neighbors do. What, I'm sorry? We have, yes. That was recently, in August, we got rid of these cameras, but the city council knew what these cameras were about. They knew the dangers of these cameras. We have been like talking with them for years, and they ignored our pleas. And it took a lot of evidence, a lot of media attention to get them to finally drop it. And police use these cameras against the law. There's laws against sharing data with outside agencies and the feds for purposes of criminalizing people for immigration or abortion. And we found the evidence that they were doing that for years, and nothing has happened to the cops. They only got more weapons. So I'll touch on that in a little bit here. Yeah, so these pictures are taken without any warrant, right? They're just taking the pictures indiscriminately, not letting you know. So all your plates, all your travel patterns are in the database. Congratulations if you drive a car here. And this database is managed by Flock, right? It's a company, profit-motivated company. They have the data. When we ask for the data, they won't give it to us though, right? So the data is accessible to be searched throughout the network of subscribers. So anybody who purchases any other of our neighbors or police agencies are subscribers to this contract, they can have access to search for other subscribers. So if you're in Texas, you could come and search our data. If we're friends with somebody else in Madison, we can search their data. It's basically like Facebook for surveillance, right? So this is a sprawling network across the country, thousands of cameras everywhere. There's actually a website called dflock.me, and you can see where the cameras are. So it's an open source map that activists have been contributing to where these locations are, which Flock calls them terrorists, right? So they're concerned about transparency, and so they're now the terrorists. And so your car can be tracked pretty much anywhere your car has been, and so you could see where people are going and track them across the country, basically. So that's Flock ALPR. I want to hit the next one. So, and I'm trying to keep this brief, but I'm talking about ALPRs, but I don't want to get lost in the minutiae of this technology, because this is how it usually goes, right? Talking about technology and what's one weird trick we could get around it. We're talking about Palestine. We're talking about places that are colonized and used as laboratories for empire, right? So colonized places are used to hone weapons and technology and then bring it back, because it's much easier to use it on colonized people and then bring it back to use it on your own population, where it might be a little bit harder to do that. And these are places that weapons are battle tested and honed, right? So they actually use the word battle tested. And Evanston, as an outpost of empire, is a colonized land, and we're here in the heart of that empire. So in the next slide, I'll take you through a brief tour of what weapons Evanston is deploying against us. Buckle up. All right, can you hit it one more time? Yeah, I have a little animations. Okay, we'll go back. That's okay. That's all right. All right, so the first example in the corner right there, that's a software package called Placer.ai. This is an Israeli company who makes this software. It's capable of tracking devices. And it's usually used, they're selling it as a way to monitor foot traffic for businesses. The Evanston Chamber of Commerce purchased this, right? Here, this picture, you can see this is a map of downtown Evanston. It's kind of a fuzzy little picture, I'm sorry. But basically, you can see the heat map of where people are traveling in Evanston. How they know who these people are, it's your device, right? So you have a smart device, you have an app. The app has an SDK to serve ads. And so through like third and fourth parties, somewhere along that line, they could extract that GPS location and then track you. And so they could see where you go, where you live, who's around you. And by that data, they can make make a profile about you, about what they expect you to be, like how old you are, how many kids, things that they can sell products to you, right? But if they have that information for that, they could certainly use it for other things. There's actually Weblock. I don't know if anybody has heard of Weblock, but that's a similar technology that ICE is using, where they could geofence in a location, basically draw a circle around a location, and then say like, hey, what devices are there or have been there, or where did they go, right? Very similar way they're getting at that information. So these are similar technologies. And this is an Israeli company. When they created this, they said, hey, we had this algorithm and we wanted to monetize it. what is Israel doing with this algorithm? How did the algorithm fall in their lap? Like, I have some ideas, right? So this is how the military-industrial complex in Israel is working to bring technology back to the US. Okay, next one. All right, this is a fun one. This is Celebrite, another Israeli company. So that's your phone, right? So the cops could take your phone, plug it in, it'll bypass your security, grab the contents of your entire phone, and then just go and run wild with it. They can look at your browser history, your contacts, cookies, like whatever it is your phone has, they got it. And that's, I think, a very intrusive technology, but Evanston, for some reason, wants that. Well, you know, what is Evanston cops doing with that? So it's kind of a weird thing. Next one. Tasers. So these are electroshock weapons. From this technology on, this is actually a part of a whole big contract that Evanston just signed on to. $6 million, 7 years, and all the technologies I'm going to talk about next came in that contract. So this happened maybe a couple weeks ago, so very recent. I don't know if anybody's remember that, but it happened, and
the city council signs off on it?
City council signed up on it, and I'll explain why they did that.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Tasers, sorry, I'm off my notes here. Yeah, tasers, they're electroshock weapons. They still kill people, and they promote the use of a racist pseudoscience called excited delirium, which I won't get into the details too much in the weeds on it, but it kills people, and then they try to explain why it killed people. And so the idea that these weapons are non-lethal with how they market them, not so much the case. Next one. Body cameras. Wow, body cameras, this is great. Woohoo, we got body cameras, right? So this is part of a reform package in Illinois. In Illinois, it's required to have body cameras. And this is how these weapons got here, right? So when this contract came up, Axon, who creates all this whole ecosystem of weapons now, right? They have all these technologies. And because it's required for us to get body cameras, the councils looked at it and said, like, okay, we need body cameras, obviously, for police accountability, and it's a law. But then it came with all this other stuff, right? So why do we spend $6 million for body cameras? That seemed a little bit weird. So it's really interesting. In that meeting, they were talking about body cameras and trying to explain to the council why we need them. Most of the reasons why they needed them was to protect the cops and to protect the state, because they use them in court and they use them to exonerate cops. But we all thought the cameras were meant for police accountability. That's not so much the case, as we're starting to learn. And there's a study out by Alec Karakastanis. I won't get into the weeds on that, but it's a study about body cameras and what happened since 2020, and everybody wanted body cameras, right? Okay, next one. Drones. This is a really fun one. You know, Evanston had a ban on drones. When drones were kind of new, the community rose up and they said, we need a ban on these drones. There's not policy here to determine how we use these drones in a safe way so people aren't unfairly surveilled. So they're waiting for state law to catch up, and the state law caught up. And you know who wrote that state law? It was called the Freedom from Drone Surveillance Act. Wow, that sounds great. You know who wrote that? Mayor Biss. Mayor Biss wrote that, the senator. And so it protects people for their amendments rights. Like political speech, you can't surveil people for that. So that sounds like a good idea, right? But in 2023, cops were doing it anyway. They were surveilling Palestinian protesters with all the rallies with drones under Mayor Biss's leadership, right? So that's how much the law protects us. Next one. Another thing that comes with the package, the ecosystem of violence that Evanston Council sold on. These are Fleet 3 dash cameras. These are dash cameras on police cars. They're recording all the time, and they're ALPRs. So Evanston got rid of ALPRs, but then they bought some new ones. And so now Axon ALPRs are on dash cams. These are mobile dash cams, mobile ALPRs, right? The ones we were looking at were like they're on poles and like looking at the streets. These are mobile now, but I guarantee you that when the people start to forget again, the cops are going to come back and ask for stationary ALPRs from Axon, because they also have that. We don't have that yet. I think they're just trying to see what they could get away with, right? So, okay, next one. This is the cherry on top. This is called Fusus, and this is what they call a, quote, real-time crime center. This is like supervillain shit, right? So it's a computer system that it aggregates all these surveillance data, and then it does fun things with it, right? So it takes it from body cameras, fleet cameras, and then if you have a Ring camera at home, or if you have another camera you want to tie in, the police are like, hey, join our program and give us your footage, and then they'll tie it right into the system that just does, it could share the data just like Flock was sharing data, and do all kinds of fun things with it. Question?
Point out that you mentioned that, and I was wondering if you could get on the Ring cameras. I think you don't get asked. I believe you have to opt out. You have to set your.
Is it default?
Yeah,
You have to opt out of it? Yeah. Yeah, and so if you go on a website for Evanston Police, they'll have a program. I forgot what they call it, but you could basically sign up, and if whatever camera you have, I'm sure it accepts any camera. You could actually be like, hey, I want to be a good citizen and contribute to the effort, and give them your surveillance data. Don't do that, please. And if you have a Ring camera or some other camera at home, look at it and see what it's doing. So all this, this is only a couple of years of work we were doing. So this is what we know of. I'm sure there's a lot more insidious things going on in Evanston. This is only Evanston, right? And this is just scratching the surface. So I want to note that surveillance weapons are usually talked about in a particular obfuscating way, right? The way that I just did. But there's something missing here. Something missing here in this slide, in these pictures. Can anybody guess what's missing in this picture? It's not a trick question, I don't think, but is anything weird? Anybody, any guesses? Next slide, please. Thank you. It's the people. Like, these technologies are not objective. They're not running on their own. They're not, magical. They usually this technology, because I'm a technologist, I see the way people talk about technology in like board meetings and stuff, and they mystify this, right? It's too technical for you to understand. But what they do is super simple, but they want to make it complicated by talking about the technology. Oh, is it networked? What is it doing? Is it AI? It's machine. They put all these fancy words, but at the end of the day, it's impacting people's lives in a serious way, and that's a simple message to understand. They'll also talk about experts. When city councils are talking about, oh, we need to look at flock safety. Let's have a meeting about flock safety. Let's bring in the experts about it. Who is the experts? Cops, police chiefs, salespeople. So they'll bring Axon or Flock come in and do a pitch. They'll bring the cops in and be like, wow, we really need this. Think of the kids, right? But you know who the experts are? It's the people who are feeling the impacts of the surveillance. Those are the experts, and they're never included in these conversations. So that's, through this research, we've learned some of these simple lessons, and we've distilled them down, and that's one of the most important ones that I came away with. And if there's anything to understand about this technology, I don't really want you to know about Flock, the vendors, the camera, like all that stuff is not really important, right? What's important to remember is when you see it being talked about, who's out of the conversation and who is in, right? So that's one important lesson that we got from that. Technology is not neutral. People are behind it. People are making it. People are using it. And these people are acting on behalf of a system. So also I don't want to get in that trap, that liberal trap of like, oh, that's a bad guy. That's a bad company. We need a better company. We need a better cop, or train the cop. We need more cops. Because that reform, like we saw body cameras, what happened was we got body cameras, then we got more police, and we got more technology. Now we have drones, and we have ALPRs, and we have real-time crime centers, and we have tasers, so it just leads down a bad path. So what's that system? The system of empire. that uses other lands as laboratories for honing oppressive tactics, tactics that are much easier to experiment on with people who are not members of our exceptionalized empire, right? It's a use of these oppressive tactics here and abroad that transforms and reinforces the colonized mind. It's like a feedback loop that propagates empire, right? So like, we are part of the empire, we're colonizing a land, and they're experimenting on the people there. That has an impact of our mind. Like, what does that do to us? How do we resolve that contradiction where we're part of this, or we're complicit, and it transforms us, makes us think that we have to kind of like accept it in a way, and just like, oh, that's, you know, like, do you ever hear about the conversations on the street about ICE raids and stuff? People say like, this is like a third world country, right? And that should tell you a lot what we think about our place in this empire. So, and when I do presentations like this, people get overwhelmed and they're despondent and they're like, oh, it's too much, right? But I always just end off, I'm saying like, you know, these are recent developments. This is new stuff. This where we are at, this is like a very small blip in the course of human history. These are things human made, and these are things that humans can unmake. I'm very excited for this opportunity and this place, this political moment, that we have a lot of work to do, but it's clear ahead of us, right? So happy to connect after this or whatever. Question?
Yeah, I'm just listening to you and I'm wondering, I don't have teenagers at home, but would your teenagers be safer if they all had flip phones instead of iPhones? Or wouldn't it make any difference? Can you repeat the question for the people?
Yes. Asking if there's a safer kind of phone, right? Like a flip phone, like a non-smartphone, yeah. And this is something that I hear through Lucy Parsons Labs a lot, because we're technologists, we talk about technology a lot, and people want to, you know, what's the thing I can do? What's the better camera? What's a better phone? What's a better chat app? All that stuff. There's like not a magic bullet for this, right? Every phone talks to a cell tower. I don't want to get too much into it. Basically, there's no safe phone, right? So if you have a cell phone, you're using cellular service. Right now, there's not really a cellular service that's private. I mean, there's some couple out there that are trying. But if you are connecting to a cell tower, there's opportunity for you to get tracked. If you buy a burner phone, right? You buy a separate phone. This burner phone idea that people talk about, it's really sexy. But then that phone is right next to your phone. And so now they triangulated, this phone's always with your phone. Or if you even separate them, one time you might mess up. You're constantly thinking about where your phone is. You know, is it turned on? Is it turned off? That's metadata. And from that metadata, they could find out a whole bunch of stuff and then go like, oh yeah, that's just this person has two phones. So there's not really a good fix for that. We're just stuck here together about all this technology. We're, you know, social media and all this stuff. We'll have to find solutions for that, but right now there's not a good solution. Question?
I was just going to offer one perspective that I think is kind of snowballing off of what you're sharing. It's, you know, it's not a zero-sum. The digital safety conversation, we are not going to necessarily fix the systemic problem there, but one of the single most powerful things you can do to protect yourself and your family and friends and neighbors is to join a movement, whatever that movement may be, where you will likely be brought into digital safety guidelines and best practices, many of which we know have been really developed by Black and Indigenous organizers who have faced the state surveillance and violence over many, many generations. And so there's lots of things you can do, from, you know, encrypted messaging to browsers that are probably a better choice right now. And I think just remembering that it's easy to get the fear paralysis and say there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Really, there's a lot that you can do in the way of just individual measures that I think go to the movement, go to the organizers. They've got practices to share with you.
Yeah, there's digital hygiene practices that you can start to learn and become habits. And sometimes to, you know, I'll stop there, but yeah, any other questions?
Is there any tracking of these companies' contributions to candidates, especially the Israeli ones?
Oh,
Can you repeat the question?
oh yeah, sorry, thanks. Is there any, what was tracking of the companies and like lobbying, or who they're politically contributing to? That is a really good question, and yes, that's not in my area, but that is the one way to kind of like, that could be one entry point into trying to stem this violence. I think a ban on surveillance might be a good thing too. But in the meantime, they're vulnerable as a company, right? So Flock Safety has been seeing a lot of that. They're scrambling right now because they have such a bad reputation, deservedly so. But Axon was happy to step in their shoes and eat their lunch. So it's a whack-a-mole game. We got to get underneath it. Question?
Aren't they all, in a way, sort of part of the militarized industrial complex and that like $900 billion budget that was approved by like members of Congress in December? $900 billion, and it was like bilateral support. Yeah. Would that be? That's part of that bill, right? And this is all part of like.
Yeah. Yeah, the question was, is this all part of a big kind of surveillance system or a lot of money being funneled? I mean, as we saw during the election, like all these big companies came and stood with Trump. J.D. Vance was protege from Peter Thiel, and he has a plant Palantir. It's all connected, with what happens usually in these conversations with like city council, whatever, like asking them to get rid of Flock Safety or ALPRs, right? They're like, okay, what's a better company? No company who makes this technology is good by default, by the very thing, right? Like, so if they're making it, well, there's nothing they can do good. It's just, and they're all connected, right? They're all sharing data. I surely know it. Flock was one of the pieces of evidence we found with Flock Safety and why Evanston decided, oh, we can't, that's too much, we had these cameras around, was there was a, quote, pilot program where Flock Safety was giving CBP, Customs Border Patrol or Protection, access to the data. And then that's when we were like, But I don't know why any other Illinois agencies are still using Flock, but Skokie, Lincolnwood, Des Plaines, just Park Ridge, everybody's still using these cameras. They should all be, I don't know. It should be banned from Illinois at least because there's laws against it. And you would think with those laws they would protect us, but not when the cops use it. So any other questions? Thank you very much. I'm sorry I kind of rambled on, but I'm with Lucy Parsons Labs. Lucy Parsons Labs. I know, so it's like Parsons Labs, 2 S's, but yeah, Lucy Parsons. Thank you very much.
Good job.
We are going to have a quick discussion led by Andrew Ginsberg, but if you need to head out, just make sure you get one of the handouts at the door with further actions and further reading. Also, we have a table at the back that has goods from the West Bank, all made by women in the West Bank, and the proceeds go directly back to them. So make sure to stop by there.
People they can go to savethevillages.com to buy the same items.
And if you're watching online, you can go to savethevillages.com and you can purchase items there. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
And actually, one more thing before we go to the question and answer. I'm going to invite Diana Balitan from Anak Bayan, who's been organizing on behalf of Filipinos who've been caught up in the ICE detention centers. And Diana can tell you how you can help. So you gotta have
Okay. Wow, 2 microphones. Hi, everyone. Thank you for putting on this amazing panel and day. In Anak Bayan, it's a Filipino organization fighting for the rights of Filipinos here in the U.S. and primarily in the Philippines, right, to fight for a free Philippines. We've worked with many different detainees. I'll speak louder. We've worked with many detainees here all across the U.S. and have amazingly been able to push for the release of 8 Filipinos who are now back home with their families, but many others have been sent back to the Philippines. I actually am here today to just talk a little bit more about the connections to the Philippines to Palestine. If you don't know, the Philippines is the greatest recipient of U.S. military aid in the Asia Pacific. So just like the role of Israel in the Middle East and the role of Puerto Rico even, right, for Latin America, the U.S. uses the Philippines as a jumping off zone for its war with China. And as Anak Bayan, we really do a lot of work to expose the U.S. military connections But know the fact is that they're exporting their military tactics to really be used on the people as well. So all the counterinsurgency, all the things that we know that ICE is doing, that the military is doing everywhere, they're also doing in the Philippines. In the past couple of years, they've even done a training, the Customs and Border Patrol of the U.S. with Philippine enforcement groups in the Philippines too. So all these tactics that we see happening here in Evanston, outside of Broadview, in Minneapolis, we know is being exported everywhere. But I wanted to talk actually today, just very briefly, about a person that I've met named Chantal Anacoche. She's a Philippine-American citizen. She has been a really great, volunteer in her community. She's from Maryland. She's worked with seafarers out of the bay over there. Seafarers who have actually been also caught up by ICE, detained and deported. But just this past year, she actually went back to the Philippines to volunteer with different indigenous communities. So she was with a community called the Mangyan Araya people who live in the island of Mindoro, which is a very fertile island. And it's constantly being harassed by the Philippine military there. On January 1st, the Philippine military bombed the community that she was in. There were 12 aerial bombs that were dropped. And the different organizations like About Face, the Veterans Org here, they were actually able to help us identify the helicopters and the missiles that were used, that they were actually manufactured by Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics. So we really know that it's U.S. companies, right, U.S. warfare that's being sent to these other places. There were 3 youth who were killed, or actually 5 total, but 3 indigenous youth who were killed in that bombing, which the Armed Forces of the Philippines is saying that no one was actually really killed. So they're lying about that. Chantal has been held by the Philippine military since then. So it's been about 3 weeks that she's being held by the Philippine military, not charged with anything, but still just being held by them. So we've actually been calling on U.S. senators and including her own in Maryland, who's Senator Von Hollen, and also other representatives to also help us call for her release. Since she's also not being charged with anything, but the fact is that she was really there, right, to do exactly what Eli did, which is to really learn and understand what's going on in the communities and to be alongside them. So yeah, I have a sheet of paper. These are old. Originally, they were to call for her surfacing because she had disappeared for 6 to 7 days in the Philippines. Now that she has been revealed to be held by the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we're calling on community members to help us sign a petition for her release. If you are interested and willing to also call your legislators, if you're part of organizations, to make statements to help get her story out. But as Chantal would say, it's not just her story and her release. It's a story of the indigenous people of the Philippines to also expose what actually happened in their community, to expose the bombing, and to expose that the U.S. has a major hand in that. And we as U.S. citizens or people here in Evanston, in Chicago, from the United States have also a say in what happens with our funding, with our U.S. funding, and that we will also call for the end to U.S. military aid too. So thank you, Andrew, for giving me the time to speak, and I'll pass out these flyers.
Okay, speaking of calling your Congress people, next week they're going to vote on defunding ICE. And there were actually 7 Democrats who voted against defunding ICE last week. So calling your Congress people, it's inexcusable for not just the Republicans too, but for any of them to, vote to continue to fund what ICE is doing. So that's another thing that you can do. So,
the vote in the Senate next week?
yeah, in the Senate.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Yeah, got it, my bad. Okay, so we are going to go, we have 3 blocks of discussion questions, and I think I'll use classroom technique of getting the audience involved a little bit. So we'll do a kick it to you for a few minutes, talk to each other, talk to your neighbors about these questions, and then we'll take a few volunteers from the crowd. But I think we should have a little bit of a chance to process all of the great things we just learned. By the way, another round of applause. Amazing speakers. Amazing audience, too. Applaud yourselves. Okay, so we'll start with the set of questions number one. So Judith brought up the concept of the imperial boomerang, when a country who imposes imperialism and colonizations on other nations begins to occupy itself. So obviously ICE is doing that, but let's try to brainstorm and identify specific ways that the same kind of surveillance and terror, state terror that's being used on US colonies and used by US client states is being used by ICE. Also, what I've kind of realized just studying history is when the so-called good guys win, they don't really give up the powers that the previous people use. So say the corporate Democrats took power again, what ways would they use surveillance and internal colonization against the people? So talk amongst yourselves. We'll take a few volunteers. We'll give you, 2 minutes? We'll give you 2 minutes. 2 minutes. How about 3 minutes? 3 minutes. Go fast. Hi, everyone. We're having great conversations. It's amazing. And there's going to be even more topics to talk about, so you could combine ideas. So can we get 1 or 2 share-outers? I did forget to mention you have to come up here to do the sharing out so that our audience can hear. Okay, can we get someone to share the results of your very, very, very great conversations I was observing? So, all right. Introduce yourself too.
Please don't.
Okay, don't. Fine. Yeah, you gotta hold on. Yeah, just talk into it.
Well, we talked about the first one, and as a point of fact, the Department of Homeland Security and ICE underneath it, that came from the Patriot Act, which some of you may remember was passed right after 9/11. And it also, for the first time, defined, quote, terrorism in First Amendment terms as a matter of belief. And there was a lot of objection at the time, and of course it passed. I think there was one person, Barbara Lee, was the only one that voted against it. But all of this comes from that moment when the US was seizing on the collapse of the Soviet Union to take over the Middle East. So I think its empire is at home. It's capitalist imperialism. It's not coming back here. It is here. This is where it started. And as important as this transformation is right now, I think we are headed very quickly into a fascist state where the rule of law doesn't matter anymore. Due process, which was denied to the people in Guantanamo. I think I'm really looking forward to Michael's book on Islamophobia, because Guantanamo was the first modern 21st century concentration camp where hundreds of men, Muslim men, because they were Muslim in the wrong place at the wrong time, were denied any due process and held in complete torture for decades. Many of them still remain there. Funded by, of course, Democrats and Republicans, all of which is to say, these are laws and due process and constitutional rights that we need to defend. Much as they are, this is the time to stand up to this fascist regime. So I hope that in understanding that both parties are parties of the status quo, we don't overlook the fact that there is a difference, and we have a fascist in the White House who needs to be removed now.
Second question, the local angle. So how do we hold politicians like Daniel Biss accountable when they sign these shadowy surveillance deals? So just a little kind of my own soapbox on this. I find it curious that somebody who signed this deal, who avoided public scrutiny on it for so long, is going, after all the stuff goes down, after his police officers help them get away with the people they've kidnapped, how they are, or how he is talking about how anti-ICE he is and how you should vote for him for that reason. So how do we hold politicians like Daniel Biss accountable when they sign these shadowy surveillance deals? And he's not the only one, right? Our speaker was talking about how all the nearby cities have the same thing, and they're probably making the same noise about how they're standing against this when they're literally in cahoots and enabling it at the same time. So, all right, talk to each other. 2-3 minute conversations. Pick a person to share out. Okay, everybody, we're going to ask you to pause your conversations. I know these are amazing conversations, but we are going to have one more topic bank. So let's wrap those conversations up in 5, 4, 3, 2. Wow, that didn't even work. That always works. Okay. Should I do clap? Should I do clap once if you hear me? Yeah, let's bring it back. I know, I'm trying some of the more subtle things. Okay, so can we get one more volunteer to share out what you talked about in conversation number 2? How do we hold these politicians who get on camera and claim one thing, but do these shadowy deals in their real lives? Yes, come on up. All right, here we go.
Something that was discussed in the group I was in was to just put shame onto these politicians, look at their donors specifically, put pressure on their donors. I've interacted with Biz, he hates me, because I embarrassed him multiple times. So politicians don't like being shamed, especially by young people, and he cares a lot about looks and appearances, as all politicians kind of do. So yeah, put pressure on them, make them embarrassed, call it out, and look at their donors. Yeah.
All right, yes. Okay, one last set of questions. There's a few of them. These are kind of like our takeaways. So you can do like a choose your own adventure or do all 3. So what's a way you can talk to people who don't understand the ICE-Israel connection to help them see the big picture? What can we say to people who say this surveillance is unavoidable, it's just the modern age, and it benefits small businesses, right? That's how they market like Placer and some of the other stuff. And then what is something you learned here that you really want to share with others? I'm also going to mention one thing. Starting in 1 minute in Fountain Square, there is a vigil in solidarity with the people of Minneapolis, which, by the way, is not just Eli's hometown, it's my hometown as well. So I think I'll be heading over there afterwards. So if y'all want to stop by on the way, that would be good. So take a few minutes talking about this, and then this will be like our last, we'll get one more speaker, and then this will be our last thing. All right. Those conversations, and we do need to pick one more share-outer. These are important. Hopefully you're all doing one of these things. You're going to talk to somebody. You're going to do one of these things. But can we just, and keep talking afterwards, because, you know, we have this room for a while, but can we get one share-outer on one of these 3 questions or some combination of all of them? Come on, we need one. We need someone new. Come on up. Come on up. Yes. All right, just grab them both.
Thanks.
Yeah, and an announcement.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. In our group, we talked about how we have to start from where people are, know our audience to the extent that we can. So we might be talking to someone who doesn't even have a stance on Palestine and Israel, but is really clear that they don't like ICE. That's very different from talking to somebody who is fully in the pro-Palestine camp. And so we have to know who we're talking to, and then just be curious. Like, how do you feel about the surveillance that's being used against us in our communities? And then maybe their response is, what do you mean? What surveillance? And then you can share what you know. And then you say, what do you think about how this is being imported from Israel? What do you mean it's being imported from Israel? Well, let me tell you what I know. So rather than the mistake that I've made too many times is to try to download everything that I know into the mind of the person I'm speaking to, and it's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. You can't do that. So start from where that person is, and hope that you're building a relationship that's going to keep the lines of communication open much longer, versus alienating that person by trying to say too much too fast, and then they never want to speak to you again. So it's much harder, much easier said than done, but that's what I'm learning personally, step by step. While I'm up here, I'd just like to make another quick announcement before we all head out of the room and hopefully to Fountain Square. There are 2 other Kappa-sponsored or Kappa co-sponsored events coming up that we would love to have your attendance at. One is on February 4th at 6:30. It's at Lake Street Church, where our speaker, Michael Woolf, is the pastor, right? It's his book launch. He and his wife have written a book confronting Islamophobia in the church. And the host and interviewer will be Sausan Abu Bakr, who is the founder of Advocates for Justice. So we hope we'll see you there. And also a anti-occupation activist from Jerusalem named Sahar Vardi will be here on February 22nd. She's a conscientious objector from the Israeli military. She'll be speaking twice that day, Sunday, February 2nd in the morning in Oak Park, and in the afternoon at Haymarket House, which is at 800 Buena and is a beautiful facility. If you've never been there, I highly encourage you to go and check out Haymarket House. And this is likely, or is sure to be a very powerful event. We are just one of many co-sponsors on this event, and we hope you'll come and bring a friend. So thank you. Flyers about these events are available to pick up on your way out at the registration table. Any final words?
All right, everybody. So we just wanted to thank you for coming. It's like cold and snowy, and it's a Sunday, and we all got work tomorrow, or most, Anyway, a lot of us have work tomorrow. So yeah. So just like thank you so much for coming, and I know you're all gonna tell everybody. So yeah, it was really great to have you, and we're gonna wrap it up. Buy the Palestine made goods on your way out. I think we still have a few more snacks, and come to the upcoming events. And I think we might all see each other in a few minutes at Fountain Square. So, all right.